just Facebook just unveiled the metaverse or whatever, which looks like a living nightmare to me. You know what I
My
mean?
God, yes.
But at the same time, it really does.
Storytelling always will have a future because, as you say, it's coded into our genes. We have to tell stories. We tell stories to yourself about everything and anything every day just to get through the day.
The idea that all possible worlds actually exist, but just on a different frequency, and how every moment you've been alive exists forever.
That something's not quite right.
Right, exactly. It's like when a Southern Baptist sees something not quite right, they see the devil.
Right, exactly.
And then other people just see something not quite right.
Yeah. So the question being, is storytelling for you more about escapism or a call to action, or a bit of both? Welcome to an extra special episode of The Wandering Bard, a bonus historical and educational series on stories from the Hearth, examining the history of storytelling and the people behind it. On today's episode, I was lucky enough to sit down with another independent podcaster, Joe Fisher of Midnight Burger. Joe's show Midnight Burger has been making waves in the audio drama scene, reaching 50,000 downloads in its first year and attracting myriad fans, including myself, who cannot help but become infatuated with Joe's motley crew of characters. I invited Joe onto The Wandering Bard so that we could have a chat about storytelling, what it means to him, what the future of storytelling might look like, and why, during the pandemic era, it has become more important than ever. We discussed whether life might be infinite, how podcasting might just be the most revolutionary art form ever, and the role of religion in a diner which travels through space, time, and the multiverse. I had an absolute blast chatting with Joe, and I implore you to go and check out the first season of Midnight Burger, wherever you get your shows. Interviewing other fiction creators is something completely new to me, but it's something I'd love to continue doing. However, I do need your support to keep doing it. I want Stories from the Hearth to host a variety of storytelling content, but only the support of fans and patrons can give me the time and space I need to grow this show into something even more special. You can support me on Patreon and earn yourself heaps of exclusive perks at the same time. Just head to patreon.com/Stories from the Hearth, or hit the link in the description down below. You can watch my conversation with Joe in full on my YouTube. There's a link in the description for that too. Well, shall we begin? Hi, Joe.
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, very well. It's lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. Let me see.
Thanks
I can barely hear you.
Oh,
Reason.
okay.
Let me fix my audio situation.
Yeah, sure. I can hear you loud and clear, but
Oh, there we go. That's me. It was my
good?
headphones.
Oh, okay. Well, it's wonderful to have you. So you're in LA, is that right?
Yes, Los Angeles.
Bright and early?
Bright and early. Yeah, I always get up early though. I've just ever since I had a child several years ago. It's always been early in the morning, and I just never really. And he's much older now, but for some reason I never got out of the habit of waking up early in the morning. So
I can imagine. Hey, it's a good way to get things done.
Sure.
Well, thank you very much for stopping by. I'll introduce the section of my podcast a little bit, and then we'll crack on in and have a nice little conversation.
Sounds great.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining me on Stories from the Hearth. This is a section of the podcast called The Wandering Bard, where I take a bit of time each month to kind of explore the nature of storytelling, the history of it, and the people behind it. So recently I've been looking a lot at like the ancient forms of storytelling. So Chinese shadow puppetry, hula dancing, the griots of West Africa as well, which was super interesting. And I look as well at like the whys. Why do we tell stories? What do stories do to help us form culture and protect that culture? But I wanted to shake things up a little bit and bring on somebody who has been making waves in modern storytelling. So
I think today I'll call this, instead of the Wandering Bard, the Wandering Burger, because you are the creator, host, director, and writer of Midnight Burger, which is an audio drama following a time, space, and dimension spanning burger joint with a motley crew of characters,
Right.
which I've fallen in love with. So I hoped you might introduce yourself a little bit and just tell us a little bit about your show.
Yeah. So my name is Joe Fisher, and I've been a writer, since I was a kid, I suppose,
Sure.
like a lot of us have. And
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, Midnight Burger sort of came about because, well, it came about during the pandemic. What had happened is
Yeah.
that I thought, there might be, I thought that there'd be a nice project to pass the time. So what I did was I approached a friend of mine over at Earbud Theater, and I said, "Hey, I have a 3-part miniseries that I'd like to do. I know plenty of actors who are doing nothing right now."
Yeah.
And so we produced a 3-part sci-fi show called Omega Station, and it went really well. And that was 3 episodes. And this was me naively thinking that, it'll get us through the summer, and then by then the pandemic will be gone and everything will be fine. Well,
Yeah,
guess what
everything will
happened?
be back to normal.
What
Yeah.
happened? Yeah, and then here we are with things still not back to normal. So at the end of that, I sort of approached the same company of actors and I said, let's just do something that's open-ended.
Yeah.
And so Midnight Burger, I'm not exactly sure where it came from exactly, but there it was. And I sort of designed the characters for the particular company of actors.
Okay,
And
interesting.
Just kind of went from there. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, it seems to be that there is a lot of pandemic influence in Midnight Burger. Of course, Gloria loses her taqueria at the very start, which is why she's on the hunt for this job and turns up at Midnight Burger. But Midnight Burger also seems to be kind of a safe haven for her. Obviously the concept, which is brilliant and allows for that open-endedness, is that each day opens somewhere in the multiverse. And whilst there's all this chaos kind of going on outside, it seems to be that there is this kind of safe haven. During, if that's an allegory for the pandemic, then did you find that perhaps making the podcast was, your safe haven, so to speak?
Yeah, it absolutely was. There's this terrible part of me that actually functioned really well in the pandemic because it was sort of springtime for misanthropes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I knew that would be ultimately sort of unhealthy for me. And so I had to reach out, which is not something that I do very well. And so I reached out to old friends of mine. And I was trying to remember, because I think we were all pretty miserable, and I was pretty miserable, and I tried to recall a time when I was not miserable. And these particular actors that I'm working with, I worked with them sort of during the sort of most creative time of my life. That it was sort of like a very fun, sort of constantly creative time in my life. And so I decided to reach out to them again and try and get some of that feeling, back for myself. And yeah, it was sort of the idea, as we all kind of descended into the pandemic, I think there was this sense that nobody's safe.
Absolutely.
That your safety is an illusion really on any level.
Mm-hmm.
And that became kind of, and I started to just look at the entire universe and try and think of what is the safe place. And then I thought, oh my God, there isn't one. And
so let me create one.
So let me create one. And just the idea of, the world being just a big gyre of chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do you cling to? And, what it becomes is you cling to other people.
Yeah.
Who are also in the same situation as you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think for me, that's kind of always been storytelling. storytelling and stories have always been that sort of safe place in the universe, because in some ways they're not in the universe. They exist, well, of course they are, but they exist in our own projection of whatever that universe is, and can really kind of be that. I certainly,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
Storytelling, I mean, that's how I started. I started making up stories when I was a kid, and my life was kind of odd. And storytelling for me became a way of sort of normalizing my existence. Making up stories is an incredible way to give you a place to go when you're stuck somewhere. Especially when you're a kid. And then that slowly became sort of a lifelong thing, and it's still that way to this day. It's still a way for me it's still a sanity tool, it's still a mental health tool for me, for sure.
I think historically storytelling's been a mental health tool as well. It's always been the focal point for community, for one, in all its different forms. But certainly when I've been studying these various histories of storytelling, the one unifying factor is that it brings people together. And in the past, that's been a physical necessity. I mean, a wandering bard came to town, and you had to go and gather around the town square and listen to them, or go to the tavern. I wondered, because you obviously took, like I did, to podcasting to tell this story. So I wanted to ask a two-part question. Why podcasting? Because Midnight Burger, I feel, would work in lots of different forms of storytelling. And also with podcasting, since that takes things into a digital space and not a physical one, how do you think that affects that sort of bonding of community that storytelling's so good for?
Well, I think the main thing for me about podcasting, I think if when I was first starting out, if the technology and the availability and the with so many people adopting the technology, I think if that was around when I was first starting out, I may have been only doing this.
Yeah.
There's a certain for me, there's always been a particular sort of romance to a desk and a microphone, and I think that came from Spalding Gray. I don't know if you're familiar with Spalding Gray, but he did a lot of one-man shows in New York City back in the 80s and 90s. And the whole set was just him and a desk and a microphone. And it was just him telling a story. And I was like, wow, that awesome. Looks like a really great gig for some reason. I don't know why.
It's the comfort.
So for me, it was something, yeah, it's nice. Yeah. It is. But so there was this part of me that was kind of unfulfilled by not doing it in the first place. And then in the second place, the access to making it happen, the ability to make a podcast happen is fairly low. It's you don't really need that much to do it. And so because of that, creativity and telling a story and a creative endeavor goes down to its purest form, because what it should be is an artist creates something and then puts it out into the world, and everyone decides whether or not it's relevant.
Yeah.
But I think what you have a lot these days is, it's like the Fran Lebowitz thing. It's like there's too much art, too much democracy in art, and not enough democracy in politics. In between you and the realization of your vision, there are way too many people.
Yeah.
So getting those people out of the way and you just putting out what you want to put out is incredibly rare. And podcasting is one of the places where you can do that, with a lot of freedom.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think even in those historic art forms that I'm talking about, it's still kind of rare. I mean, even though, now you have all of the machinery of capitalism that's in the way there, you have the politics of of fame and influence as well, which
Right.
stand in your way. You know, I have pals who are fantastic illustrators, but who know that their other pals who have more followers on Instagram are more likely to get a publishing deal because that's free ad campaign, you know, all of this sort of stuff.
Right.
But I think that's always kind of existed in some sense. Like if you were a hula dancer, you couldn't just go out and perform. There were very rigid rules which surrounded that. If you were a griot of West Africa, you know, you had to be born into that. Your dad had to teach his son to do that. So something
Right.
like podcasting, or you know, pirate radio a little earlier, it does, yeah, absolutely. It gives us the ability with fairly little money to put our stuff out there.
Yeah.
I'm definitely, you know, I find it very inspiring that another independent podcaster who's doing this with a fantastic cast, but you know, you're writing it, directing it, producing it, like alongside Finley Stevens. Is that right?
Yeah.
Who plays
Mhm.
Eva?
Yeah.
You know, that's a hell of a lot of work. What do you enjoy all of that part, all of that storytelling, or do you find parts more challenging than others?
Well, it's got to be sort of necessarily aggravating. I mean, without the sort of aggravation there, you with the aggravation, it wouldn't be worth it somehow. I'm not sure how. It is sort of the most creatively rewarding thing I think I've ever done in my life. Uh, but you know, but you at a certain point you get used to the pain. You know, it becomes a necessary part of it, and you do kind of get to like it. You know, you do sort of get to like the aggravation of you're looking at, you know, a pile of audio files, and then you have to
Yeah.
make it into a show.
Yeah.
And you just sort of crack your knuckles, and you know that it becomes part of your process. The pain becomes part of your process, you know, and if it wasn't there, you wouldn't know if you were doing anything or not.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
that's a very good point. A very good point.
Yeah.
And with a regular 9 to 5, you would be experiencing plenty of pain without the payoff, I guess, in many respects.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas, you know, with this, as you say, there are challenging parts, but you get to be creative every day. And that is a rarity. That is a real rarity.
Yeah. I mean, I think the ultimate goal, and you know, I don't think that anyone has ever really achieved this. Maybe like Prince or someone like that, but it's like the goal is to create more culture than you consume, right?
Wow. Yeah. I
Which
like
is
that.
nearly impossible.
Yes, of course.
Nearly impossible. Which is
Especially
why
if you watch as
Prince,
much TV as
who
I do.
allegedly, that's right, exactly. um, so you look at people like Prince, who allegedly wrote 2 songs a day his whole life. Um, you know, yeah, it's something to aspire to. No one will ever get there.
Of course not.
You know what I mean? But I think that's definitely something that, you know, you should try for. That should be the brass ring, I think.
Absolutely. Listen, I had a question about the future of storytelling, because obviously
Okay.
Midnight Burger deals with the future in its infinite possibilities.
Mm.
And I wondered, being as that you are finding great success in podcasting and in audio drama, um, where do you envisage the future of storytelling? Where do you envisage storytelling going now that we have this as a medium?
It's sort of like asking, where do you see eating food going? I think because it's something that's, because it's something that is, I mean, there's very few things in our world that we've been doing since we became human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we've been making food for each other,
Mm-hmm.
and we've been sleeping with each other, and we've been telling stories to each other. Those are the 3 things that we've been doing longer than literally any other thing on the planet.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, and so to sort of say what is the future of storytelling is sort of like it's almost like, I mean, are we afraid it's going to go away? Are we afraid that it's suddenly we won't tell stories to each other? We won't ever stop doing that, because
No.
the thing is that every human being is a storyteller.
Yeah.
Even if you're not telling, even if you're not making up a story and telling it to someone else, you're always telling the story of your own life to yourself.
Very much so.
You know, you are always placing meaning on things that are happening. You're telling that story to yourself, maybe not to somebody else, but every human being is a story. And you are the writer of that story, each individual. So to say, you know, that does storytelling have a future, and things like that, it is sort of like saying, does humanity have a future? Do human beings have a future? Which sometimes is questionable.
Which sometimes is
Sure.
questionable.
No, but it always survives in some form or another.
Yeah.
I mean, what's amazing right now is that you have all these, you know, just Facebook just unveiled the metaverse or whatever, which looks like a living nightmare to me. You know what I mean?
God, yes.
But at the same time, you know, it really does. But at the same time, you'll see, you know, you'll read an article in the Wall Street Journal that says that people consuming podcasts and stories like these is only going to increase in the coming years. Like those are the forecasts, you know, which is can be a little frightening because, you know, here come the people wanting to wring money out of the entire situation. So that's always, you know, what could possibly go wrong. But it is interesting, like in the middle of all of these advancements, something that's actually gaining in popularity is the simple task of someone telling a story in your ear.
It seems to me like it's, well, because interestingly, I was kind of going to ask whether with the increase in sort of immediacy and the desire for like immediate gratification with TikTok videos and things that are so constant and bite size, whether long form storytelling you felt was safe. But I think we've kind of tackled that. I think you're right. I think storytelling always will have a future because, as you say, it's coded into our genes. We have to tell stories. We tell stories to ourselves about everything and anything every day just to get through the day. But that is interesting that these things are on the rise.
And it's also like when something becomes popular or something becomes desired, there's always going to be the desire for the opposite of that thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So, and the thing about podcasts and audio drama is that, and storytelling is that it's kind of anti-internet. You know, a long story can't go viral.
Sure.
You know, it can't, it isn't bite-sized. It's delivered through the internet, but is almost anti-internet. You have to sit there and you have to listen.
Yeah.
And you can't do anything while you're listening, because if you're not listening, you're going to miss something.
Yeah, for sure.
In a second. You got to sit there. Yeah, in a second. So, you know, the popularity of sort of things like Midnight Burger these days, I think, has to do with the fact that maybe for some people the internet is a bit much sometimes. Maybe it is kind of taxing sometimes to take in everything in, you know, 1 minute bites. And maybe you do need a second to sit and think and engage in something that's a little more complicated and a little longer and a little more meditative.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of seems as well like within Midnight Burger, within the diner, there is almost that representation in Effie and Zebulon McElwain's old-timey radio, right? Because they they are without going in toward the end of the season, they are an old-timey radio or gospel radio show, which is super grounded in this very specific, like quiet, calm, to some degree, place in Arkansas, which is going on all the time, despite the fact that Midnight Burger itself is roaming the multiverse and coming across, you know, monstrous beings and robots called Steve. So it seems like you've kind of integrated that into Midnight Burger itself, that sort of dependency on the quieter, more long form storytelling.
It is, yeah, and it you know, Effie and Zebulon do kind of keep you moored to a particular place, and I'm not even sure what to call that place. But it is I mean, I'm kind of interested in from time to time in the show, I kind of explore like how the language of religion and science overlap sometimes. So
Yeah.
having in a densely scientific sci-fi environment and hearing what the interpretation of that is from a couple of you know gospel preachers from Arkansas in 1925 is kind of what keeps me interested in that particular mechanism of the show.
Interesting. Well, that brings me to another question I was going to ask, which is that religion, or at least earth religions, are
Mm-hmm.
fairly rare in science fiction. I mean, if you look at something even as expansive as like Ian M. Banks's you know massive universe that he creates, there are faiths and religions, but generally they are so alien to us as the aliens and the science, the hard science, that there isn't a grounding in a religious dogma which we understand and can relate to either personally or fairly directly. So
Mm-hmm.
how did it come about that you brought that in? Was it for that juxtaposition of ideas? um
Um, yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm not a very religious person myself. I don't
Likewise.
go to any sort of church, and I don't. There's no. I don't. Prayer is not a part of my life,
Yeah.
and neither is anything like meditation or some sort of ritualistic behavior. It's not really a part of what I do with myself. But the I do think though that the majority of people in the world do have some sort of religious practice. And
Mhm.
I think that comes from somewhere. And regardless of how you may feel about the institutions that surround that particular religious practice or those particular beliefs, um, it comes from somewhere.
Mhm.
And what I'm interested in is, does that come from somewhere is it trying to express something that they have a hint of, but they can't quite put their finger on? We're about to record episode 1 of season 2 tonight.
Oh,
And
exciting.
yeah, and it's very exciting. But in that episode, there's this kind of crossover where we talk about a lot of the ideas that Michio Kaku talks about. The idea that all possible worlds actually exist, but just on a different frequency, and how every moment you've been alive exists forever in space and time.
Sure, sure.
And they're all simultaneously happening right now. And the idea, and when Effie and Zebulon interact with that idea, they see it as an expression of eternal life,
Mhm.
the same
Mhm.
expression of eternal life that you would, hear in their religion. And I wonder sometimes if the reason why we talk about those things and the reason why, where that idea actually came from is because we actually had a hint of how the universe works and we expressed it through religion.
Yeah,
So,
I have queried similar things myself in the past and in story episodes of Stories from the Hearth. I wrote one called Spirit, and like yourself, was not raised in a religious family. I not religious really in any way, but I wondered about this sort of spiritual connection that people do feel to the universe around them. And I wondered if through our sort of scientific endeavors to explain everything, we often kind of discount a lot of religious theory or thought, including, for example, eternal life. And yet now, as you're saying with Akaku, talking about there being eternal life in the sense that all life, there is only a present, thus all life is happening simultaneously. And therefore, in some senses, there's eternal life. So yeah, I think that's a really fascinating take um, on that dichotomy between religion and science. And certainly in Midnight Burger, it helps to kind of just frame things again in this. It allows you to see that there's no one answer, right? The way that Ava sees the Leifs who visit Leif, and the way Leif sees them, and then also the way that
Right.
that Effie Mucklewayne sees them,
Right.
are all different, and yet kind of grounded in the same understanding that something's not quite right.
Right, exactly. It's like when a Southern Baptist sees something not quite right, they see the devil, you know,
Right, exactly.
and then other people just see something not quite right,
Yeah,
but they're not wrong.
yeah,
It may not be the devil with horns and things like that, but it's, but the intention is there,
yeah, and
and the gist of it is there.
sure, it's a story you tell, it's a character you reference in order to convey a simple warning that is very understandable even to a non-religious person. If you say that's demonic or devilish, then you know what the meaning is there. And
The message is delivered for sure.
Yeah, the message is very much delivered. One of the things I was going to ask you was that, having a look at your cast list and also the production team of you and Finley, there's a clear kind of 50-50 gender split. And you have Gloria, played by Susie Suarez, who's effectively your protagonist. I feel like she is us, right? Like she gives us the grounding. So I just wondered if you might like to talk a little bit about representation within Midnight Burger, because that's always something that I kind of strive towards with Stories from the Hearth, trying to keep it kind of queer focused, but that's my own personal experience shining through there. Is representation something that you considered when writing it? Was it just a natural kind of process of which characters fit which actors? Or
It's funny. I remember, when I first started out as a screenwriter, there was this, what you have sort of like your sample script, and everybody reads the sample script, and then you go around Los Angeles and you drink every water bottle in town and you talk about yourself, and it's all just a million meetings that never go anywhere, right? And the sample script that I had was a sci-fi sort of adventure script, and the main character was a woman, and the amount of times that I was commended for the main character being a woman was shocking to me, because I didn't deliberately, it wasn't something that like, I'm going to make this bold choice now, but it was regarded as something that was like, you have put a woman in the middle of a big budget sci-fi movie. That's amazing that you've done that.
Yeah.
And I would just say, what are you talking about?
Because you looking at the aliens, like they're crazy. They've got hearts.
I grew up with Ripley. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
And some of the greatest sci-fi movies in the world have had a woman as the main character. So I guess it was never something that I was consciously. I don't know that I never. It's never something I do consciously, but it's something that. Why would I want a group of people in a story who all have the same perspective?
Yeah,
that sounds incredibly boring to me.
Yeah.
So when you do see stories that are sort of, I remember sitting around, because screenwriters love to just sit around and kvetch about whatever, and just because they're the most unhappy people in Hollywood. And I remember a friend of mine. I remember a friend of mine sort of saying like, yeah, my manager says I need to add another female character. And it's like, God, I already have one. And I was like, you already have one? It's just like, I don't understand. I don't understand how you have this homogeny, how you want every character to sort of have the same type of perspective and be kind of the same way. The fun of the whole, it's like Effie and Zebulon and a sci-fi world. I mean, it's that juxtaposition
Yes,
that makes things so great. It's the clash of perspectives that
absolutely.
bring about drama and bring about opportunities to have conversations about a lot of different things.
Absolutely.
So you kind of have to do that.
Hmm.
I just never really did it. Me personally, I never really did it sort of deliberately.
Sure.
It was just like these were the,
Well, I think
you need that diversity of voices in anything you do, I
you
think.
do. You absolutely do. And more people would be good to listen to that and employ it. But certainly, I think with genre fiction, genre audio drama, fantasy, sci-fi. Certainly for me growing up, um, that was always my jam, and I think that it showed me the importance, the innate importance of those different points of view, those different perspectives, because writers like Ursula Le Guin or Tolkien, even. I mean, for all it being a fairly male-dominated world in Tolkien's work, they're not grounding it really in reality or in their own biases or the biases of society around them. You're blowing everything up. You're in a burger joint that is in like the last ice age. I mean, there's no reason for there to be any kind of hierarchical structures unless or heteronormativity or homogeny unless it serves a purpose for the story, right? Like
Right.
as you say, it kind of just has to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll leave you with a couple last questions.
Mhm.
One of the thing is that obviously stories have to entertain. I feel like that's kind of the reason you're writing them is to entertain yourself, right? For the first in the first instant, but they tend to have ulterior motives too. And I noticed certainly some of the episodes that I really particularly loved of Midnight Burger were The Ad Man Cometh, which is also a great. I don't know if it's an It's Always Sunny reference, but it kind of feels like that. It's great. And Solitary, Poor, Nasty, Brutish, and Short. Because they both, I mean, lots of episodes of Midnight Burger do, but they seem to comment very specifically on our society now, obviously, with the rampant advertisements in The Ad Man Cometh and in our lack of, I guess, running around and catching animals anymore in Solitary, Poor, Nasty, Brutish, and Short. So the question being, is storytelling for you more about escapism or a call to action, or a bit of both?
It's definitely a bit of both. And I don't know about, I mean, a call to action. I mean, if someone were to say to me, okay, well, what do we do? I'd be like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what action to call you to, and, like even Older Leaf in episode 6, he says something. It's like you get to a certain age and you begin to wonder, am I changing the world or is the world just changing? And I convinced myself that I did it.
I like that line.
I don't know. I don't know what impact an individual has on the great wave of consciousness on the planet Earth. I don't know how to do those things. But with those two episodes that you cited, episode 5 and episode 9, like it's actually the same actress as a guest star. It's a friend of ours, Jessica
Cool.
Morris, and you can actually see her character in episode 5 kind of turning into her character in episode 9, because she makes this speech where she says, look around you. Do you see a thing done right or a thing done wrong?
Yeah,
And
it's a really good speech.
so I don't know about a call to action. I guess this is just, it's just the things that I say to myself. And you want to say it out loud, because what if someone else is feeling the same way and they think that they're the only one who's feeling that way? But so it's in terms of escapism, don't write from a particular perspective myself. I don't have a very strong identity that I write from, and which always gave me kind of an inferiority complex because there's so many writers out there who have such an interesting story themselves.
Yeah.
It's just like I don't have that interesting story. I'm actually, kind of a boring person. But then I read about Keats. When Keats was talking about Shakespeare,
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about how Shakespeare had something he called it negative capability, which was the ability to dissolve your identity in a story, right? So Shakespeare, one of the things that was so great about him is that he could tell the story of the Prince of Denmark. He could also tell the story of the Moor of Venice.
Mm-hmm.
He could also tell a story about a guy turning into a donkey. He could do all of these things, and you didn't get a sense of him. You didn't get a sense of his personality. He disappeared. So negative being the absence of self.
Of course, yeah.
And there is so it's kind of both for me. There is this, I do want to lose my identity in the story,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, sometimes I need to say something.
Yeah.
So it becomes so my burger kind of becomes both of those things for me.
And without enforcing your identity in the story by allowing the story to speak for itself whilst saying those things, I think those things come from a place where people are more likely to listen because they're not being lectured at by the author. Their characters that they've fallen in love with are saying something that they go, yes, I get that too. I think that's brilliant. Listen, Joe, I shall have to let you go soon because the powers that be on Zoom are probably going to kick me off.
That's right, the Zoom gods.
The Zoom gods. But when this episode comes out, it's the day before season 2 launches on your Patreon. And the season 2 launches November 29th. Is that right?
Correct.
So thank you so much for coming on. It was really, really lovely to talk to you. I'd love to talk
more.
Having me.
I had a great time.
Yeah, good. I'm really glad. Thank you for chatting. I can't wait to check out season 2. What can we expect?
You can expect, we have a bifurcated story now in season 2. So Casper is somewhere out there somewhere.
Yes.
And the burger is Midnight Burger is kind of actually kind of being hunted by a particularly nasty alien race. So we kind of we wanted to, do a bit more sci-fi epic this particular season. So there's going to be some fun stuff like that. There may or may not be a space pirate at some point. So be prepared for that.
Fantastic. That sounds wonderful. Great stuff. Well, thank you so much for coming on Stories from the Hearth. I hope you have a great day. Good luck recording episode 1 later on, and keep in touch. It was great to chat to you.
I definitely will.
Awesome.
I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, Joe. Take it easy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this extra special episode of The Wandering Bard, or should I call it The Wandering Burger, on Stories from the Hearth. I really hope you enjoyed my chat with Joe. I think you should definitely go and check out Midnight Burger straight away, because I know that you're going to rip through those 10 episodes just in time for the second season to come out on the 29th of November. Do let me know what you thought about this episode too, since it's completely different from all of the episodes I've done so far. Do you want to hear more of this? And if you do, maybe you could consider checking out my Patreon by hitting the link in the description down below. It would really help me if you could rate and review the podcast or this episode on whichever podcast player or app you use. Share it with your friends and family, and if you want to support this venture even more, then as I say, join me on Patreon. Until next time, I've been Cal Bannerman, and you've been listening to The Wandering Burger on Stories from the Hearth.